Great. So for those that have just joined, you're joining Strategies to Support Executive Functioning and Self-Regulation in Children and Youth. My name is Dr. Orson Morrison. I'm a clinical psychologist and director of DePaul Family and Community Services. I'm also a local Oak Park resident. I have two kids, one in D97 and the other at the high school here in Oak Park. A little bit about our clinic at DePaul. We are a full-service child and adolescent community mental health center located in the Lincoln Park campus of DePaul University. We provide the full range of services like individual and family therapy, psychological and neuropsychological testing, group therapy. Traditionally, we have psychiatry as well. And we have a number of community partnerships with organizations and schools all around the Chicagoland area. And one of our newest partnerships, it's now about 3 years old, is the Mindful-Middle-Scholars / Mindfulness Matters program. A few years ago, the Oak Park Township put out a request to providers to propose services that were geared towards supporting children who are struggling with anxiety, depression, and executive functioning challenges. And our team put together a proposal whereby we're offering these community talks as a way to provide adults, parents, caregivers, teachers, the resources, the tools, the knowledge in order to best support kids who are struggling with a variety of mental health needs. We're also offering school-based mindfulness groups. We're using a model called mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, and we're offering those groups at Brooks Middle School, Julian Middle School, Irving, and Holmes Elementary Schools. We hope to eventually expand the groups to all of the D97 schools, but we started small and we're kind of gradually expanding to more and more schools. We are also offering individual and family therapy, both in the context of the school, as well as home-based therapy. In addition, we have two care coordinators who are assigned to D97, and the care coordinators really help to connect families to needed resources in the community. So they're sort of like a community navigator. If you have any questions about any of those services that I mentioned, you're more than welcome to reach out to me directly, or if you happen to be at Brooks, Julian, Irving, and Holmes, you can reach out to your school administrators. They are well-versed in our programs and would be happy to consider your particular student or child for those services. I would ask before we get too far into the presentation that if people can mute, that would be wonderful. It just keeps the noise level down. Also, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please just type them into the chat and I will pause in the middle of the presentation to try and answer those. I'll also take questions at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to cover just basic definitions of what executive functioning is. We'll look a little bit at the brain and how the brain relates to executive functioning. We'll talk about the development of executive functioning skills across childhood and adolescence. And the bulk of the presentation is really focused on practical strategies that parents, the teachers can use to really teach these skills and support the development of these skills in their young people. So let's take a very brief look here at this video clip.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors. We
Sorry.
have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce.
Look at your shapes. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this? A tool.
What is executive function?
Safety goggles.
Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain. Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on lots of runways and really exquisite timing and so on. A child has to manage a lot of information, avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, the child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn. But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
7 and +4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated. The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years.
I got a match prize.
It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become, because you're helping to strengthen those neural connections.
Mom, you're at 24.
Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they can get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things, and they're unafraid.
I got bit by my dog in my arm. Oh dear.
If we don't learn these skills during the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society.
You're okay.
right. So thank you so much for watching that brief overview clip. So the speaker there was referring to executive functioning as sort of this airport control center. And really that's a really nice analogy for this. This is the center of the brain that is really navigating and coordinating all the many different types of skills that are needed in order to function in our lives. Here's sort of, kind of a scenario that, some of you may actually feel resonates with some of your kids. An 8th grader spontaneously gets invited to hang out with his friend after school. And, the friend lives across town. Earlier that day, the teacher announced that there'd be an unplanned science quiz the next day. Mom and dad are running late from work, and you need your son to run home to let the dogs out. And he's upset that this will cut into his free time. Your son also has soccer practice at 7 p.m. So many of our kids have so much going on. And so there's so many executive functioning skills at play in this one scenario. Planning, how do I get from one person's house to the other person's house across town? How am I going to organize? How am I going to plan the limited time that I have to hang out with my friend, to study, to go to soccer? How do I regulate my emotions, my frustration? Oh my God, my parents are running late and they're asking me to walk the dog. I don't have time for this, right? So there's so many different skills that are involved here. Keeping track of the time throughout the evening, transitioning from one task to another. The list goes on and on. So there are so many types of executive functioning skills. So we're going to kind of walk through some of them so that everybody understands. Inhibitory or impulse control. This is the ability to stop and think before responding or acting. So mom makes a beautiful plate of cookies and puts them on the counter. The ability to resist that impulse to grab a cookie. That's an executive functioning skill. Self-monitoring, that ability to kind of step back and look at how am I doing on this particular task? Am I doing it according to the plan? Am I achieving towards that goal that I'm working towards? Flexibility, the ability to have a plan, but if something comes up, to adjust that plan. If we are driving to a friend's house and there's 5 block parties in the middle of the path, how do we get around all of those block parties to get to our friend's house? Emotional control. This is an executive functioning skill as well, that ability to regulate our emotions, to not let our frustrations or our angers or our anxieties get the best of us. The ability to sustain our attention on a particular task for a period of time, for a lengthy period of time, and to resist getting too affected by our boredom or distractions in our environment. Task initiation. This is that ability to begin projects or to begin tasks without the need to coerce or to, that extreme efforts that we sometimes have to do to get our kids to do something, right? Having them sort of initiate things on their own. Working memory. This is the ability to take in information through our senses and hold that information in our minds and use that information to solve problems or tasks. Planning and prioritizing. So our kids have a number of things on their plates. They have chores at home, they have homework, they have extracurricular activities, they have friends, social lives, family time. And so to be able to sort of take all of those things and sort of plan and prioritize, what do I have to get done first? Organizing self and materials. So, going into your children's bedroom, how well are they able to sort of manage to keep things clean, to keep things organized? Pulling out their backpacks, do they have things organized in folders, or do they have things just sort of shoved in there, right? These are all executive functioning skills. Metacognition, the ability to take that bird's eye view to sort of look at not only what's going on for them, but what's going on for my family, what's going on this month, to sort of hold all of that information in one's purview and act accordingly based upon holding all that information. This is a really, really hard skill for particularly young children to have. And I'm not going to read through this entire list, but when a child is struggling with executive functioning skills, we may see some of these things, really, overreacting, acting without thinking, being impulsive, easily frustrated, having difficulties transitioning from one situation to the next situation, having difficulties being flexible, responding to adaptations in the environment, doesn't notice their behavior, doesn't really think about the impact their behavior may have on other people, loses things, messy rooms, messy backpacks. All of these things can be signs and symptoms that a child may be struggling with executive functioning skills or haven't yet fully developed them. I think one of the things that came up in that video is that these skills develop over time throughout childhood and throughout adolescence. And these are skills that can be taught, right? So it could just be that the child hasn't been taught and is not in that routine habit of practicing and building those skills. So here are some of the factors that might impact executive functioning. And there's so many potential impacts here. So a child may have learning disabilities. They may have conditions like ADHD or other mental health conditions, depression, anxiety. All of those conditions can produce or can relate or exacerbate executive functioning challenges. Autism spectrum disorder, experiencing racism, discrimination, microaggressions, traumas of various sorts, prenatal drug and alcohol exposure, brain injury. So it's really definitely not a one size fits all. There are many, many underlying issues or causes or things that impact a child's development of these particular skills. The problem is that over time, if a child continues to struggle and perhaps continues to not learn these skills, they start to encounter difficulties in the environment. They start to really struggle at achieving academically. They struggle to form relationships that are satisfying. They get into a lot of conflicts with their parents and teachers, for instance. And so they come to internalize this idea that they're not good enough, they're not doing this right, they're stupid, they're lazy, right? And so their self-esteem really gets impacted here. And so as adults, as teachers, as parents, as caregivers, we really need to be mindful of the language that we use in these moments. Do we use critical language? Do we feed into those messages that the children are perhaps internalizing without a conscious awareness of it, right? So being very mindful of how we're responding in those moments. Are we taking a teaching approach, or are we just exacerbating the sort of inner critic voice that many of these kids end up developing? And so the video clip in the beginning kind of gave you a very brief introduction to the brain. And When we think about executive functioning, we often think about this prefrontal cortex, the top part, the top front part of the brain. This part of the brain is involved in many executive functioning skills like concentration, planning, attention, coordination, those sorts of things. But they're also, and this is known as kind of the rational part of the brain. There's also this lower part of the brain stem, which is actually the oldest part of the brain, what we call the most primitive part of the brain, sort of our survival brain. And this part of the brain is a lot more sort of reactive. The issue is that when we are living in that reactive state, that survival state, we're not really adequately using our executive functioning skills, right? And so if a child, and this is why, issues like trauma and depression and other sorts of mental health conditions make it difficult to bring online those executive functioning skills. And so again, when we're talking to our child, it's really important to not yell at them, because when we yell at them, what we're going to do is we're going to actually evoke the survival part of the brain. And so we're going to kind of not leverage or not allow that child to really tap into that prefrontal cortex or that rational brain. Okay, so we want to take a little bit more of a teaching approach, and we'll go over some strategies in a moment. This diagram or picture here just highlights the development of executive functioning skills throughout childhood and adolescence. And the prefrontal cortex, that front part of the brain that we were just talking about, is actually the part of the brain that takes the longest to develop. And it doesn't fully develop until the early 20s. And so we need to kind of take that into consideration too, is that these skills actually take quite a bit of time to fully master. And so we shouldn't necessarily expect our children, particularly our younger children, to really have this all figured out and mastered. And so this, some of the highlights here, when we're toddlers, we're trying to learn how to manage our impulses, right? We're trying to regulate our verbal communications, our motor skills, etc. As we get a little older, we're working on regulating our attention, keeping our attention on a certain task, being flexible. And as we get older, into those teen years, we're trying to learn how to plan, to organize, to hold complex tasks in our mind and prioritize, sort of those higher level executive functioning skills. The takeaway here is that these skills take time to learn and to develop. And as a result, we as adults, we as the parent, we as the teacher, we as the caregiver, we're sort of functioning as surrogate frontal lobes for our children until they are young adults. And so we really do need to take that approach that we often have to step in, we often have to teach, we often have to model these behaviors and reinforce these behaviors for our children over and over and over again until that part of the brain gets really online and really strong and really internalized into the child's behavioral repertoire. Before I transition to strategies, I just want to take a moment to pause and see if there's any questions that have come up yet. I do have one question about getting the slides. Yes, I am recording this presentation. I will be sending you a video recording as well as the slides. So you should expect that probably tomorrow morning. Any other questions that folks are having at this moment? If not, I will continue on. All right, great. Let's see if anybody has their hand up first. Awesome. All right, so another really important takeaway for tonight's talk is that, like any other academic subject area, executive functioning skills must be and can be taught. These are skills that as adults, we need to help our children learn, right? And these are more and more schools, more and more teachers, more and more curriculums are actually building executive functioning skills training into their curriculums, because more and more research is suggesting that that's the strategy on how to bring these skills online, is to really teach, to model, to supervise children learning these skills, to encourage them, and then over time, as they master these skills, really begin to fade our involvement or a level of supervision over certain skills. So strategies specifically for developing that inhibitory control. Visual cues, this may be, I see this a lot in like earlier grades, younger grades, visual signs on the classroom walls, the stop signs, the use of hand signals, pictures of a quiet mouth, traffic lights, green for go, red for stop. Having these visual cues around the classroom as well as around the home, particularly for the younger kids or for kids who haven't developed these sorts of skills, can be really useful. The use of a fidget toy or other sort of object, Velcro, squishy balls, those sorts of things can sometimes help children who have impulse control issues to sort of direct their attention, direct their energy in some other way. Adding a step, so taking a larger step and or adding sort of an intermediary step can slow down the thinking or behavior. So if a child, for instance, is interrupting the class all the time, just verbally kind of, interjecting their thoughts or inputs to the classroom, you may have them write it down, or write their questions down, or write their comments down as sort of an intermediary step. It just helps that thinking to slow down, and it develops that muscle of inhibition, verbal inhibition. Strategies for sustained attention. Younger children in particular have a very short attention span. And so starting really small, having a child focus on math homework for 5 minutes. And then, once they seem to have that down, maybe 10 minutes, and gradually kind of building the length of time that a child is focused on a particular task. Also taking periodic short breaks can be useful. Visual timers, so having a timer on your child's desk when they're doing homework can help. Okay, we're actually gonna sit down and we're gonna read. You're gonna read for 15 minutes and have that timer right on the desk there so that they have a visual cue here for that length of time. It gives them a little bit of motivation and doesn't feel like this endless time dedicated to this task. Modeling, teaching, coaching, reinforcing, thinking out loud procedural steps can also help, using mnemonic devices. Motor movements or motions, particularly for kids that are really more kinesthetic, that like to move around, sitting for a long period of time can be really difficult. So taking those motor breaks, positive self-talk as well. teaching social scripts or different scenarios, maybe, talking with your child. Here's a problem. What would you do in this situation? What if a child that needed some help with their math homework? What are some ways in which you can solve this problem? So really thinking through these different social scenarios and involving them in conversations and problem solving around those scenarios can be really helpful. And again, how we talk about these issues with our children, really we want to bring online that higher level prefrontal cortex, and we want to get them out of the sort of the primary or primitive survival brain. Okay, so if we're asking our child to do something versus telling or yelling at them to do something, this is going to activate different parts of the brain, right? So here's some sample language here around a particular issue around homework. So sometimes it's hard to keep working on your homework until it's done. What are some ways that you could motivate yourself to keep working? So that very question is activating the prefrontal cortex. It's not activating the survival brain. Now, if you're yelling at your child to get your homework done, it's going to activate that survival brain, and that's not the part of the brain that we want to activate in those moments. So strategies for task initiation, we're really targeting motivation here, and some kids really, really struggle with getting motivated about a particular task. Here we want to perhaps focus on incentives, reinforcement, and it doesn't need to be material reinforcement. I know a lot of parents use sort of material reinforcement, but it can also be a lot of just verbal praise, specific praise. I like how you got your books out and began studying, right? Just even starting in that very, very small way. This is scaffolding, right? We are taking the task, maybe you have this goal of helping your child sit for 30 minutes and do homework, but getting there, you're going to have to really start small. Maybe just pulling out your homework is a first step, right? And so you may want to just reinforce that. And then as the child gets more and more comfortable, you're building on, you're scaffolding other parts of that task until they actually reach that goal. Maybe having a checklist on their desk, as a reminder of the sorts of things that they need to do, the steps they need to do in order to get things going, getting their materials, getting their backpack, sitting in the chair, getting a glass of water, whatever they need. And they can help kind of come up with the list and maybe put it on their workstation as another visual cue. Planning, strategies for planning. And there's a lot of different strategies here we can use. Visual schedules, posting a schedule. So whether you're in a classroom, what are we going to be covering today? What are the times we're going to be transitioning from task to task? Or they can be home-based, home-based schedules. What is the plan for after school, soccer practice, study time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Having that visually ready is very useful. Weekly or monthly calendars, I think in addition to having that daily calendar, having one big calendar where a child is able to sort of see all the many different things that are going on in a month. And they can, maybe they have a project, right, that's due at the end of the month. They could actually use that calendar to break that task into maybe smaller due dates. By this week, end of this week, I'm going to actually finish reading this book. By the end of this week, I might have been I might complete annotating the book or whatever. By the end of this week, I'm going to finish writing the paragraph. By the end of this week, I'm going to review this, but with mom or dad. You know, sort of really breaking it down into manageable steps can really help it feel less overwhelming. And getting that global big picture snapshot of all the different tasks and steps can be helpful. With regards to school planners, really keeping it simple, keeping it, you know, a lot of these school planners in particular have a lot of like, you know, pictures and quotes. And I think for kids that are really struggling with executive functioning, keeping it very, very simple, clutter-free. Modeling appropriate planning on your own. So when, you know, you as the adults, you have things that you're planning, really verbalizing the steps that you're taking in order to plan, really model and teach those skills to your children. Strategies for flexibility. So using social stories, real life scenarios, and brainstorming, you know, if this sort of a scenario comes up, what are the possible solutions? How could we respond differently if this sort of a situation came up? Logic or strategy games, those are very useful in teaching flexibility. Maybe a common board game that you play at home as a family, maybe coming up with brand new rules. You know, today, you know, we're not going to follow the rules in this particular game. We're going to make up our own rules. Let's do this together. Teach thought stopping, relaxation, or coping strategies. So taking deep breaths, calming, self-talk, leaving the room. So identifying strategies that they can utilize in moments where they're having a hard time being flexible. And of course, our kids are watching us. I keep coming back to this, the modeling aspect. But how do we respond when things don't go our way? When we have to adjust our plans? Are we modeling flexibility when encountering roadblocks? Strategies for organization. Again, I like there's a theme here of visual too. And I think multi-sensory in many ways is really, really useful. So not just verbally giving the directive or the task, but also maybe posting things that highlight how you're expecting it to be done, or how an organized backpack looks, or how an organized room looks, you know, being really specific with that. Color coding binders, labels, checklists, those sorts of things all promote this skill of organization. Self-monitoring. Highlighting, summarizing, reading out loud directions. After a task has been completed, rereading the instructions. Have I completed everything? So having a list of questions that they may ask themselves in relation to each task. Using self-monitoring charts or rating scales or checklists can be useful in self-monitoring. I know a lot of particularly the middle schools, you have these platforms, I forget what it's called, Canvas, where you see what's due, the assignments, the homework, the grades. And maybe as a ritual, you and your child can sit down every Sunday night and sort of look through that together, and not in a confrontational or a conflictual way, hopefully, but more as a way just to get in the routine of checking in. Let's check in with kind of where things are, and what is your plan for the week ahead? You know, looking at these missing assignments or things that are due. What are some strategies, or what is your plan? How can I help you kind of get this done? And there's lots and lots of strategies for improving memory. highlighting things as folks are reading, using sticky notes, annotating, underlining, flashcards, using multisensory input. So again, not just verbal, but maybe representing the concept in visual form in some way, or in audio, maybe recording yourself summarizing a concept and then listening to it again. So any way to increase the different types of sensory input that helps to embed things in memory. Repetition, repetition, repetition. My son always, that was one thing when he was younger, he would do things once and he would think it was sufficient, and I would quiz him and then he still wouldn't fully get all the answers right. I'm like, it's part of learning how to use your memory. You need practice. You need to sort of repeat it in order to internalize it in one's mind. Simplifying the language, chunking things down into smaller, more achievable steps, using mnemonic devices. So maybe associating a particular concept that a child is learning with an image or a sentence or a word or an acronym or something that is easily retrieved in memory. Strategies for emotional control. Teaching kids how to identify their emotions. Using language to express their emotions. Many kids, many particularly young kids, don't know how to be aware of their emotions and how to speak about their emotions. So definitely teaching that skill is important. Talking about different emotions, modeling emotions, letting your child know, when you're angry or when you're happy or when you're excited, and using that language to model. Processing with your child, particularly after an emotional, outburst or something, when they've calmed down, sitting with them and talking with them, what triggered you? Like what was that about? Helping them to really develop that sense of awareness of what the signs, what the symptoms, what the precursors are to their emotional overwhelm. I want to talk a little bit about play, because a lot of research is suggesting that executive functioning challenges or skills can really be developed, particularly during unstructured, non-directive play. And if you think about our children and the sort of environment and culture they're living in, the nature of play has really, really dramatically changed. A lot of our kids are now, particularly through this pandemic, it's been a lot of technology use, it's a lot of video games, it's a lot of sedentary activities. And so, really encouraging as much as you can, as much as safe to do so, in a pandemic situation, of course, this unstructured downtime, these are the times, the moments where kids are experimenting with these skills and practicing these skills, right? Thinking about building forts and, being in nature. They're using a lot of creativity, a lot of problem solving, a lot of planning, organization. They're learning about interpersonal skills, etc. And these are the primary, very, very important ways in which these skills can be nurtured. Some other strategies to think about, particularly as we go back to school, making sure that the homework area is sort of clutter-free, that as much as possible a dedicated space. Looking at the technology that your child is going to be using, is it optimized? Can you reduce the distractions that are available on those devices, whatever they are, iPads, laptops, etc. Establishing some sort of a routine, some sort of a consistency. Obviously, you don't want to be so rigid about it, but definitely routine and consistency help kids internalize these skills. Timers, we talked about that already, rewards, biology, making sure that kids are back on their sleep routines after the summer as the summer comes to an end, that they're eating right, that they're getting enough water, hydration, exercise, and that relationships are really prioritized in all of this. You know, I think without a strong foundation in that child-parent relationship, that teacher-child relationship, executive functioning skills are not going to be as robust. So really, really focus on that relationship piece. I had these slides in here from last year when I did this talk on remote learning, and so here I hope that we don't have to go to remote learning this year, but we don't know with this whole Delta variant. You know, creating and posting schedules in the home as well. So thinking about your home, you're sort of like a classroom. Chunking work times, you know, kids are sitting in front of, or were sitting in front of devices for the entire day. And so as much as you can, chunking that in shorter periods of time and taking breaks, movement breaks, maybe going outside, stepping outside, getting a glass of water, etc., can really help. Create and post to-do lists daily and weekly. Learning areas. So you have to sort of set up your children's learning areas, particularly if it's occurring at home. For younger children, kind of helping to organize that, maybe by subject area. For older kids, maybe having one or a couple different areas that they have their materials there. Being mindful of energy levels throughout the day. You know, energy tends to peak mid-morning and dips after lunch. Parent self-care is really, really crucial, particularly during remote learning where, you know, many of us were working from home and also having to help with our kids' learning. So it's a lot. And teaching gratitude, I think that's also really important. Recognizing the privileges and benefits of being able to do remote learning as you know, to keep learning going can be another sort of way of looking at things that help make it feel a little bit more manageable. Mindfulness, we're going to end on this particular strategy. Mindfulness is a really core part of what we're doing with our program in the district. And mindfulness is really about paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. And this is another skill that can be taught. It's not easy to do, but it's definitely can be taught. Teaching mindfulness to children, to adults, has been shown to improve executive functioning. It's been shown to be effective in helping to strengthen that muscle of attention, particularly for people that are struggling with executive functioning and conditions like ADHD, working memory, the ability to sort of self-monitor, to become aware of what's going on for us. And so there's lots of different apps out there. If you haven't been introduced to the concept of mindfulness, that you can sort of get guided mindfulness practices or exercises, feel free to reach out to me if you want to know more about that. I'm just going to play a very, very brief audio clip. This is one of the skills, one of the mini exercises that we use in some of our groups with the elementary school kids. This is the mindful HALT activity. And this is just really developing that awareness of ourselves. So I invite you to participate along just for a minute or so. You can practice the mindful halt every day at various points in the day to get to know your body's needs, especially at moments that are stressful or challenging, or if you've been sitting a while. You can halt anywhere, anytime, and the more you practice bringing awareness to your basic needs, the more you can be aware of your thoughts, emotions, and body sensations while skillfully tending to your body's needs throughout the day. Taking a moment to get into a comfortable posture, either sitting or laying down, closing your eyes if you feel comfortable, or shutting them slightly. Take 5 long, mindful, deep breaths in and exhaling 5 long, mindful, deep breaths out. And with each breath, letting your body relax more and more. Using the acronym HALT is a simple strategy that can help you to remember to check in with your basic biological and emotional needs. When you're not aware of these needs, which we all have, they can be triggers for impulsive behaviors or interfere with making the best decisions for yourself. By reminding yourself to halt a few times during the day, to ask yourself if you're feeling hungry, angry or anxious, lonely, or tired, you become more aware of what's going on inside yourself. H is for hungry. First, check in with your stomach, but also notice your overall energy. Are you feeling hungry at all? If you are hungry, your body and brain may not have enough fuel that they need to think and see clearly, to regulate your emotions, and to control your impulses. Note this to yourself, and if you need to eat, plan a meal or a snack. A is for angry or anxious. Are you feeling angry or anxious? These 2 emotions can really affect your sense of danger and safety, and your ability to think things through clearly. If your body and brain are experiencing strong anger or anxiety, a few more long, mindful deep breaths or belly breaths can help you quiet down. L is for lonely. Are you feeling lonely right now? Feeling isolated or disconnected? The emotion of loneliness is different from the state of being alone. You might be surrounded by people, but still feel lonely. Reaching out to others to check in with how you are doing and what's going on can give you some perspective and help you to feel better really quickly. Who could you reach out to in this moment that would feel safe and help you in this moment? T is for tired. Are you tired in this moment? Maybe from lack of sleep, or maybe you're just worn out from school, work, exercise, or family issues. When you're tired, it's almost like you aren't as smart as when you're well rested. And it's much harder to manage your emotions and impulses. So what can you do to rest or relax? And if not now, then soon. All right, well, thanks for participating along with me for that brief activity that just sort of highlights some of the the ways in which we teach the skills, we do very brief skills because kids don't have lengthy attention spans. And so we gradually kind of build and internalize the skills. So seeking professional help, when to know and how to seek professional help. If any of your children are really struggling with functioning school-wise, performance, their social relationships, there's been prolonged changes in emotions, over a course of weeks or months, that may be a sign that they may need some help. You can connect with your school social work team or teaching staff and just check in and see how your child is doing. Talk to your child, involve them in the decision. Do they feel like they need some help? Obviously, with kids, you want to be involved as a parent, as a caregiver in the treatment so that you learn the strategies too to help support your child at home. The Oak Park Township Community Mental Health Board has this site called the Health Connection Hub. And this is a searchable database of community resources. So that's another resource for you. Definitely speak to pediatricians, doctors, et cetera, who may have some other ideas or recommendations. D97 students can also text the word HOPE to this number down here, and they will connect you to a live licensed mental health professional, and they can sort of talk through different crises that they may be having and help connect you to resources. So that brings me to the conclusion of the talk. There's a very, very, very brief evaluation, like literally 3 questions, I think. My hope is that you walk away with at least 1 or 2 strategies that you might try or use with your kids. So I will also email you the slides. You'll have the link for the evaluation there. But that brings the talk to an end. I am going to just stop sharing here for a moment and see if anybody has questions. All right. Feel free to unmute yourself. We have a very small group here, so if anybody does have any questions or comments, just feel free to unmute yourself. And if not, we will end shortly. Are most of you parents, or do you work for the district? I'm interested to know what your roles are. Parent, great. You've got one in each phase of life there, it seems. You're very welcome, Karen. All right, well, it doesn't look like there are any questions, but again, feel free to reach out. You will have my email address, and if you have any questions or needs that come up, please reach out. Have a nice rest of the summer. Hopefully the weather gives us some nice summer weather. Bye-bye.